The wind howled across the open plains, carrying with it a sharp bite that cut through the layers of wool and leather the lone rancher wore. Snow fell thick and fast, a relentless white veil that seemed to erase everything in its path. The old ranch house, a squat wooden structure with a sagging roof, creaked under the weight of the accumulating snow. Smoke from the chimney curled skyward, only to be whipped into a twisting spiral by the bitter gusts. Inside, the rancher, a grizzled man in his early 50s, shoveled the last few piles of snow from the porch. His boots, caked in ice and mud, left heavy prints in the fresh powder. He had come to this desolate part of the West seeking solitude, and the storm had only reminded him why. The land was beautiful in its own harsh way, but it was unforgiving. That's when he heard it, a faint, desperate cry over the wind. At first, he thought it was the howl of a lone wolf, but the tone was human, a voice small and trembling. He dropped the shovel and squinted through the blizzard, searching for its source. Through the white haze, he spotted a figure, a little boy, no more than 6 or 7 years old, trudging through the snow, his tiny frame barely visible against the storm. He was clutching something close to his chest, his hands red and numb, his face streaked with tears and frost. The rancher's heart, worn as it was from years of loneliness and hardship, tightened. Without a word, he kicked Snow aside and ran toward the boy, his long coat flapping behind him. The boy turned, eyes wide and fearful, but something in the rancher's steady approach seemed to reach him. When he finally reached the child, the boy looked up, shivering violently. "Please," the boy whispered, his voice breaking. Can you save my mommy instead of me?" The rancher felt a pang of confusion. He knelt down in the snow, letting the wind slash against his face. "What do you mean, little man?" he asked gently, brushing snow from the boy's hair. "My mommy, she's out there. She's—" The boy's voice faltered, and his tiny hands shook as he pressed a frozen mitten against his chest. She can't move. I can't. I'm too small. Can you save her instead?" The rancher said nothing. His eyes, cold and calculating in the harsh daylight, softened as he looked at the boy. He didn't speak because he understood immediately. The boy's mother was in danger, and the child had come to him as a last hope. The rancher stood, his boots crunching through the thick snow, and extended a hand to the boy. The boy hesitated, then clutched the rough hand with both of his tiny ones, shivering. "Hold on tight," the rancher said simply. He hoisted the boy onto his broad shoulders, the child's small arms locking around his neck. The snow whipped into their faces, but the rancher moved steadily, following faint tracks through the drifts. The tracks led them across a frozen creek, where the ice groaned ominously underfoot. The rancher moved carefully, testing each step before shifting his weight. The boy clung tighter, whispering little prayers under his breath. At last, they came upon a small clearing. There, half buried in snow, lay a woman. Her hair, dark and matted with ice, clung to her face. Her breaths came shallow and uneven, and her hands were buried beneath her, clutching her side. The rancher dropped to his knees beside her. "Ma'am," he said in a voice firm enough to cut through the storm. "You're gonna be all right. I've got you." The woman's eyes fluttered open, fear and recognition mixing in the frost-lined depths. "My baby," she whispered hoarsely. Her eyes drifted to her son, perched atop the rancher's shoulders. "Please, don't let him." The rancher said nothing. He simply leaned down, lifting her carefully into his arms, his large hands cradling her against the cold. The boy squeaked in surprise and then clutched the rancher's coat tighter, as if afraid the storm would snatch her away again. The wind howled, tearing through the clearing like a living thing. The rancher knew they couldn't stay here. He began the slow, grueling trek back to the cabin, one steady step at a time. The snow was deep, often reaching his knees, and the wind threatened to knock him off balance. Yet he moved with the certainty of a man who had survived storms far worse, both in the weather and in life. The boy, perched on his shoulders, pressed his face against the rancher's neck, watching in awe as the man carried his mother. Every so often he would murmur, "Thank you, thank you." His words were barely audible over the whistling wind. The rancher didn't respond. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words could. He had taken them both into his care, into his world, a world that had been cold, empty, and quiet until now. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had darkened into a bruised gray. Snow continued to fall, but inside, the fire burned brightly, casting a warm glow against the walls. The rancher laid the woman gently on the thick rug in front of the hearth and sat beside her. The boy climbed down, rushing to her side and burying his face in her arms. The woman's lips trembled as she whispered, How did you find us?" The rancher shrugged, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "You cried out," he said. "I just followed the sound." The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with wonder and relief. You saved her," he said softly, as though tasting the word. "You saved my mommy." The rancher didn't answer. He just nodded, his face weathered and lined, but his eyes warm. He had no family of his own. Not anymore. But now, in this freezing, lonely part of the West, he had them both. Somehow, that made the world a little less harsh. The snow continued to fall outside, thick and heavy, but inside there was warmth. Not just from the fire, but from something more enduring, a fragile newfound family, forged in the harshness of the winter plains. And as the boy curled up next to his mother, still shivering but safe, the rancher sat back in his chair, staring into the flames. He didn't speak of promises or plans. He simply understood that from this night on, he would do whatever it took to protect them. Because out here, in the cold and the snow, family wasn't something you were born into. Family was something you chose. The cabin was small, its walls lined with rough-hewn planks that groaned whenever the wind slammed against them. A single window, half frosted over, framed the swirling white chaos outside. The rancher moved quickly, grabbing blankets from the corner and spreading them over the woman and the boy. His hands were steady, practiced, even though the chill of the storm clung to him like a second skin. The boy curled against his mother, shivering, while the woman clutched him protectively. I thought we were going to die out there," she whispered, her voice low and trembling. Snowflakes clung to her hair and eyelashes, tiny frozen tears in a world that had nearly swallowed them whole. The rancher knelt beside them, shaking his head. "Not while I'm around," he said. The words were simple, but in them was a promise as solid as the timber walls around them. He had faced storms before, harsh winters, and empty nights where only the wind kept him company. Yet something about this night, this boy and his mother, struck a chord deep within him that he hadn't felt in years. "Who are you?" the woman asked finally, her voice steadier now, though still fragile. The rancher didn't answer immediately. He looked into the fire, letting the flames paint his weathered face with flickering light. "Name's Matthew," he said after a moment, as if that was all that mattered. "I run this place. Lived here a long time. Not many folks come this far west, especially when winter's got a grip like this one." The boy tilted his head, studying the rancher. You didn't have to save us," he said softly. "I mean, you didn't even know us." Matthew gave a half-smile, more a grimace of understanding than amusement. "Out here," he said slowly, "it don't matter who you know. It matters who you help. Tonight, that's you too." The woman pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady the rapid beat of her heart. "But how did you find us? We'd lost the trail and the snow. It was everywhere." Matthew shrugged. "I heard your boy call. He's got a voice that don't quit. Even with the wind, I could hear him." The boy blinked up at him. I thought if someone found us, maybe they'd save me. But I wanted Mommy more." His small hands reached out, gripping Matthew's coat. "I wanted you to save her, instead of me." Matthew's throat tightened. He knelt down, placing his big, calloused hands on the boy's shoulders. "I saved both of you," he said simply. "That's what matters. Both of you come home with me tonight." The woman let out a shaky breath and leaned back against the wall, exhausted. The fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across her face, making her look both fragile and determined. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. Matthew waved a hand. "No need for thanks. Just stay warm and alive. That's enough for me." He stood, moving to the small wood stove in the corner, stirring the embers and adding a fresh log. The fire roared to life, filling the cabin with warmth that drove back the bite of the storm. Outside, the snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless. But inside, the cabin became a sanctuary, a tiny pocket of life and hope in a world otherwise swallowed by cold and white. After a while, the woman finally spoke again. "I should tell you, my name's Clara. And that's my son, Tommy." Matthew nodded. "Good to meet you, Clara." "Tommy." He offered a small, reassuring smile to the boy, who returned it tentatively. There was a silence then, broken only by the occasional crackle from the fire and the wind's persistent howl outside. "Do you have food?" Clara asked, her voice careful. "Something for us to eat?" We haven't had anything since morning." Matthew moved to the shelves, retrieving a few tins of beans and a small bag of hard bread. "We'll make do," he said, opening the stove and placing a pot atop it. The smell of warming food began to fill the cabin, and Tommy's eyes lit up. He had been so cold, so frightened, that even the simplest comforts now felt miraculous. As they ate, Matthew watched them quietly. There was something about the way Clara tried to smile at her son, to mask her own fear, that reminded him of nights long past when he had someone to care for, someone to fight for. He hadn't thought about family in years, hadn't allowed himself the luxury, but now, as he watched the small boy gnaw at a piece of bread with determination and his mother sip at warm broth, he realized how much he had missed it. "Matthew," Clara said suddenly, breaking the silence, Why did you help us? You don't even know us." Matthew leaned back against the wall, rubbing at the stubble on his chin. "Maybe I do," he said quietly. "Or maybe I just know what it feels like to be out there alone, with the world trying to swallow you whole. You don't deserve that. Nobody does." Tommy looked up at him, eyes wide and earnest. Are you gonna take care of us?" Matthew hesitated. The question carried weight, far more than he had anticipated. He had lived alone for years, surviving on his own, guarding himself against attachments. But looking at Tommy's trusting gaze and Clara's weary yet hopeful eyes, he felt a shift within himself. I'll do my best," he said finally, his voice firm but soft. "That's all I can promise. But right now we need to get through this storm first." The boy nodded solemnly. I'll help too." Matthew chuckled quietly. "You've already helped. You've got courage, kid. That counts for a lot out here." The night dragged on. Snow continued to pile outside, blanketing the world in silence. The cabin, with its flickering fire and the warm bodies of 3 people huddled close, became a bubble of safety. For the first time in a long while, Matthew felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: belonging. As they settled down to sleep, with blankets wrapped tightly around them, Tommy clung to his mother, finally drifting into an exhausted slumber. Clara rested her head against Matthew's shoulder, trusting him in a way that spoke of desperation and newfound hope. Matthew stared into the fire, listening to the storm outside and the soft, even breaths of the 2 humans who now depended on him. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The promise was made, in actions, in the quiet understanding between them. Out here, in the unforgiving cold of the West, family was not given. Family was chosen. And Matthew had chosen. The storm would not last forever, he knew. And when the snow finally melted and the sun shone again on the plains, they would face the harsh world together. But for tonight, they were safe. Together. And that, in itself, was enough. Morning came slowly, filtered through the frost-lined window in pale, gray light. The storm had passed, leaving the world outside a brilliant, blinding white. Snow lay thick across the plains, heavy on the trees and rooftops, sparkling in the weak winter sun. The air was still, except for the distant creaking of frozen branches and the soft groan of the old cabin settling under its icy burden. Inside, Matthew moved quietly, tending the fire and boiling water for breakfast. Clara sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her damp hair back from her face, while Tommy played quietly with a small stick he had found in the cabin. The boy's eyes still held traces of the fear from the night before, but there was now a cautious glimmer of trust. Matthew looked at them both and felt a strange mix of tenderness and responsibility settle in his chest. He had saved them from the storm, yes, but now the work of keeping them safe, of giving them some semblance of stability in this merciless land, had only just begun. He turned to Clara. "We need to start thinking about food and supplies," he said simply. "Storms like that don't happen every day, but winter's not over. We've got enough for now, but we need to plan." Clara nodded, though her eyes were heavy with worry. I don't know how to hunt or trap. I've been living in town, not out here." Matthew shook his head. "It's all right. I'll show you. You'll learn quick enough. Tommy, you'll learn too." He crouched down beside the boy, brushing snow from his coat. "Out here, you survive by helping each other, by being smart, and by being brave." Tommy's small face brightened with determination. "I can help. I'll do whatever you tell me." Matthew smiled faintly. "Good. That's the spirit. Out here, we all have to pull together." The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Matthew taught Clara and Tommy how to start a fire with wet wood, how to gather food from the frozen forest, and how to identify safe water sources. He even showed them a hidden cache of supplies he had buried near the edge of the property: flour, dried beans, salted meat, remnants from seasons past. Through it all, Tommy clung to him, eager to absorb every lesson. He watched with wide eyes as Matthew cleaned the rifle, prepared traps, and marked safe paths through the snow. Clara, though exhausted and unpracticed, caught on quickly, her natural resilience shining through. Slowly, they became a small, tight-knit unit, learning to survive together in a land that offered no mercy. One evening, after a long day of gathering firewood and checking traps, the three sat around the hearth. Matthew handed Tommy a tin cup of warm broth, and Clara accepted a small piece of bread. The boy's eyes sparkled with contentment as he sipped, finally allowing himself a small laugh. "You know," Matthew said quietly, watching them, "I didn't think I'd ever do this again. Take care of someone. Make a family." Clara's eyes softened. "You've always been alone?" she asked. Matthew nodded. "Most of my life. Out here, people come and go. You get used to it. But I can't imagine losing you two now. Not ever." Tommy's hand reached out, gripping Matthew's calloused fingers. "You're our family now," he said, his voice solemn but sure. Matthew's throat tightened. "Yeah," he whispered. "We are. And family sticks together." Days turned into weeks, and the harsh winter began to lose some of its grip. Snow melted in patches, revealing frozen streams and barren grass. Matthew, Clara, and Tommy worked tirelessly to maintain the cabin, gather food, and prepare for the next storm. Life was still hard, unforgiving even, but there was laughter now, and the warmth of trust that could not be measured in blankets or firewood. One morning, while checking traps along the tree line, Matthew noticed fresh tracks in the snow, wolf tracks, larger than he had expected. He motioned for Tommy and Clara to stay back. The wolves were cautious, no doubt drawn by hunger after the long winter, but Matthew knew how to handle them. With a rifle in hand, he followed the tracks carefully, keeping his eyes sharp. When he returned to the cabin, Clara had a worried look on her face. "What is it?" she asked. "Just some wolves," he replied calmly. "They're hungry, but they won't bother us if we keep our distance. Still, it's a reminder. Out here, you respect the land, and it respects you back. We survive by knowing our place in it." Tommy tilted his head. We could help too, right?" Matthew smiled. "That's right. But patience is part of it too. You can't rush everything. Just like the snow, it melts in its own time." By the time spring began to creep over the plains, painting the world in muted greens and browns, the trio had transformed. Clara had grown stronger, more confident, no longer just a mother in need of protection but a partner in survival. Tommy had developed a skill and courage far beyond his years, learning from Matthew how to navigate the wilderness, set traps, and read the land. And Matthew had found something he hadn't felt in decades: a purpose. Not just surviving the West, but building a family, protecting them, teaching them, and being a part of something larger than himself. One evening, as the sun dipped behind distant ridges, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Tommy asked a question he had been holding back. "Matthew, will we always live here? Together?" Matthew looked down at him, brushing a stray lock of hair from the boy's forehead. "As long as you want. This is home now. You and your mom, this is where you belong." Clara joined them, wrapping a warm arm around Matthew's waist. "We've been through so much," she said softly, "but I can't imagine facing it without you." Matthew swallowed hard, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Then we face it together," he said simply. "Whatever comes, we face it together." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of thawing earth and pine. The snow was gone in most places now, replaced by the promise of life returning to the plains. The cabin, small and weather-beaten, stood as a testament to endurance, to hope, and to the fragile, fierce power of family forged in the most unlikely of ways. In the silence of the evening, with the fire crackling and casting its warmth over them, Matthew, Clara, and Tommy sat close together. No one spoke for a long while. Words were unnecessary. They had survived storms, both literal and metaphorical. They had faced fear and found courage. And they had found each other. As the stars blinked into existence above the wide-open west, Matthew realized that he had saved more than lives that stormy night. He had saved hope. He had saved the chance for a family to grow, to thrive, and to carry on, no matter how harsh the land or the winter might be. And Tommy, nestled safely between his mother and his protector, whispered in the quiet, "Thank you for saving us both." Matthew said nothing, simply holding them closer. The night was calm. The storm was gone. And for the first time in a long while, the West felt like home.